When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal, for Christian Seal.
Welcome. Today I will talk to you about a game which I played at a World Youth Chess Championship. I was 16 at the time, and for me it was a dream which came true playing in this tournament. So it was the first time that I got the opportunity to play in one of the World Youth Championships. And of course, this is something which is of enormous importance to every young chess player. On the one hand, you have these super smart and super interesting people around you from very different backgrounds, very different cultures. And so you get to know a lot of people, and many of them you meet later on as a chess player again. So that was great. You might think that the World Youth Chess Championship is therefore also kind of a dream for the trainers and for the accompanying persons. But I'm not so sure that this is true, because many of the youngsters not only look for mating opportunities on the chessboard. So you have to find a good balance between, on the one hand, giving everyone the possibility to show their very best at the chessboard, and in particular motivate those people who fight for medals and put as many resources into those people as possible. And on the other hand, find a balance between giving liberties to the older youngsters, while at the same time keeping some discipline in the team. And I think the balance that was achieved by our coaches, in particular Michael Bezold and also Jan Gustafsson, was just amazing. So in this game, which I will talk to you about today, I played against the Estonian player Meelis Kanep. So he's by now a chess grandmaster. At the time, he was rated 2300 and I was rated 2235. But I would guess that we were both a little bit stronger than that. And in any case, it was the last round of the tournament. So we both had 5.5 out of 10. And a win in the game would mean a place among the top 30, maybe even top 20 of the tournament. So the game was quite important in that sense for both of us. And I think we both really wanted to fight for the full point. He opened the game with a move d2 to d4, to which I replied knight f6, bishop g5, knight e4, bishop f4, and c5. Yeah, so there are many ways of countering the Trompowsky, and I chose for this setup, which is known to be quite sharp, because as I said, I definitely wanted to win the game, and the fact that my opponent chose the Trompowsky also shows that he had similar intentions. f3, queen a5 check, c3, and knight f6. So this is a line which is played sometimes, and he played now the move d5. And usually in this position, people go queen b6. But I chose for the move e6, and he played the strong move e4. The idea is sometimes if you take e takes d, it's sometimes even an option to go e5, but here that would be too early. So I should now have taken on d5, and after e takes d, the position is just a normal position out of the opening. So I should go d6 now, and maybe white has a slight edge, but it's nothing special. Instead, after e4, I committed a pretty bad mistake, which is the move queen to b6. So maybe you can already pause the video here and you can think about how white can get a large advantage. Well, the strongest move in the position would have been the move knight to a3. This obviously puts up the threat of going knight c4 or knight b5. So the only possible move to punish this knight a3 is queen takes b2. But after queen takes b2, knight b5 is very strong. And yeah, white threatens knight c7. And if I go, let's say, knight a6, white can go d6. and white is just clearly better. My queen is completely out of play here. White will at some point go rook b1, so maybe let's give a potential line. So here, let's say b6, rook b1 takes, rook a1, queen b2. White could now even take immediately on a6, but white could also just go play something like bishop d2 and later on take on a6, and yeah, would have a winning position. So after the move knight a3, my position would have been almost resignable, and you would not see this video right now. So instead, my opponent chose to play the move bishop to c1, protecting the pawn on b2. And this now makes just a normal opening, which occurs after e takes d5, e takes d5. And now I went for bishop e7, c4, castles, bishop d3, d6, knight e2. And yeah, white has a slight space advantage here. And it's not so easy for me to develop these pieces. In particular, my queen on b6 is not the best piece in the world, so I have to reshuffle a little bit. I played knight bd7, intending to go knight e5 to get the pair of bishops. My opponent prevented this with the move f4. I played queen to c7, and I think this is just too slow. So in this position, I should probably maybe go rook e8 or something, but queen to c7 is too slow because I will not really get any counterplay on the queen side. So I will now make a lot of moves on the queen side, and in the end, I will not achieve much by this. So I played queen c7, played the logical knight to c3, a6, and yeah, he could go a4 and completely restrict my counterplay, or he could just allow b5, and that's what he did in the game. Castles, b5, b3. Yeah, and now you see that I made a lot of moves on the queen side, but it's not so clear that this helps me in any way. I took on c4, he took back, and now I went rook b8. He played queen c2, another logical development move with the move rook e8, h3, and now I went knight f8. Yeah, and here I think he could just go bishop d2, and he definitely has some advantage there. But he now decided to spice things up. Yeah, so I think here is where the game gets really interesting and where we'll also start to analyze a bit deeper, because he went with the move g4. Here's the first time that I had the chance to play a very nice piece sacrifice, which I played a few moves later. But here it didn't yet occur to me to do that. And the sacrifice to go h5, and after g5 to just take on h3, g takes f, and bishop takes f6. And yeah, this position is just very unclear. Thing is, during the game, I think I was afraid that that he might go something like bishop d2 and maybe just give the exchange back. And in the end, he still has the more active pieces, which might also be true. Yeah? But I definitely have counterplay here with moves like queen d7, when he's probably forced to go f5 at some point. And then my bishop becomes even more active. So I think this position is very unclear. Instead, after g4, I decided to go knight g6. He played knight g3, and I went knight h4. Yeah, and here is another point in the game where he could have gotten a pretty good initiative, pretty strong advantage after the move f5. Yeah, f5, the idea is to maybe go bishop g5 at some point, and also to restrict all of my ideas for counterplay on the king side. If I now go knight d7, which might look logical to get the knight to e5, then you can just go, let's say, knight c4, and I can never really go knight e5 because then he just has f6, and my king is just way too vulnerable. So therefore, after f5, he would have had definitely a pretty big advantage. In the game, he played bishop to d2. And now I went for the idea that I mentioned previously, which is to go h5. Yeah, and now we will see that really wild melee ensues. And after h5, I felt that I should be better. So one idea that I saw in the game that worried me a little bit was the idea of him to play knight f5 in this position. But if I take and he takes back, this position is very hard to evaluate. And during the game, I was a little bit worried that he might go for that and then just go for an attack on the g file. But the problem is that these two bishops are not really playing in this position. So they are both looking against the pawns on f4 and f5. And therefore, right now, I have the feeling that this position is probably okay for black, but it's definitely quite complicated. Yeah, and maybe it's also a little bit easier to play for white. Instead, after h5, my opponent went for the move g5. So g5 now allows me to sacrifice a piece. So if I go back with a move like knight d7, h5 is hanging and my position just collapses, so I cannot do that. So he basically forced me to go bishop takes h3 right now. He took my knight on f6, bishop takes f6. And yeah, this position is again very hard to evaluate as the previous one. The computer now gives some insane move like king h1, which is very hard to make sense of. But from a human perspective, I think the move that my opponent played is quite logical, which is the move knight to h5. And yeah, he captures the pawn. Of course, now this gives me the opportunity to give a check on d4. And he played king h2. Yeah, and here I should have probably gone for even more initiative with the move bishop to g4, attacking the knight on h5. And let's say after knight g3, I could maybe even go queen d8, followed by a very, very strong attack on the king side. So I think objectively this position is busted for white. But it's not so easy in such an important game to just completely dismiss the opportunity of taking an exchange on f1. So that's what I did in the game. I took on f1, and he played the move rook takes f1. Yeah, now I tried to kick his knight back with the move g6. And yeah, here he went for the most crazy move in the position, but this was a little bit too much. So he went for the move king to h3. So let me go back. I think the best move in the position objectively would have been to go f5 with the idea of countering g takes h with the move bishop to g5. And now I have some trouble protecting this knight. So I probably have to give it back with the move f6 takes. And let's say queen g7. Note that I still control the square on g1 with my bishop. And yeah, in some cases I threaten to come in with the rooks, but let's say if he goes knight d1, then this position is still pretty unclear. So I think it's still easier to play for black here, because in a sense, yeah, for white it's hard to disentangle. So probably white has to go queen g2 at some point, which is not really what white wants, because in principle, when you have two pieces against a rook, so when you have more pieces, then what you want to do in such an unbalanced position is usually to keep the material on the board. But here probably white will be forced at some point to go queen g2, and then we have a very, very unclear endgame where I have the open files, but he has a slight material advantage. After g3, as I said, he went for the really crazy move king h3. The idea is kind of pretty. So he wanted to go king takes h4 here. And as crazy as it looks, it's not easy to do anything against the white king in that position. Yeah? So if I go, let's say, queen e7 check, he can just go back quietly. And suddenly white is better because I don't have any threats against his king, and my king can also become weak momentarily. So therefore, after king h3, it was up to me to find a good move, and actually it's pretty clear that I should protect the knight on h4. And yeah, here probably could have gone f5 again with similar complications as before, but he now went for the move knight to g3. And this allows black to get a very, very strong attack against white's king. Maybe you can pause the video and you can try to find the best move for black. Well, the best move is by far the move which I played in the game, the move king to g7. So king g7 has the idea of playing rook h8, and now this position of the king is really extremely endangered. So if he goes king g4 at some point, the king is even more open, and if he cannot really go back to g2, and he can also not go back to g1 because all my pieces already block these squares. So his only route later on will be to go via g4, and of course this is extremely dangerous. He now played f5, and I played the move which I had intended, just to go rook to h8. Yeah, now I'm threatening all sorts of discovered checks. So he decided to go king g4, which is basically the only move in the position. And I played another quite strong move, the move knight to g2, making room for my queen and rook to occupy this important square on h4. And note that these pieces do not really help in protecting the king. So the only piece which is kind of helping in the protection is this knight on g3, but the king is kind of lonely there. If he was to take on g6, I could just take back. And yeah, so for instance, one line could be bishop g6, queen h4, rook bf8, and the position collapses. So you cannot take because of queen h2 mate. All right, so after knight g2, he therefore went for king to f3. I played rook h2, queen c1, and now I went for queen to h4, bringing another piece to the attack. And yeah, this king is just way too weak to survive this onslaught of my pieces. He played now knight c to e4. So now that he cannot really change things by going bishop g5, because I can just go queen h3. This is not going to change anything. So he went knight c to e4. I played queen h3 with the idea of going knight h4 next. So it's quite an interesting maneuver. First of all, the knight generates a square for the queen and the rook. And afterwards, when queen and rook are already active, now the knight wants to come back to h4. So that's quite pretty, I think. And he played now the move bishop c3. But yeah, the position is just busted. I went for knight h4, king f4. Now I repeated moves once before the time control. Knight g2, knight h4, king f4. And yeah, now the way to a direct mate would have been to go g takes f, which then just threatens mate on g4 with queen to g4, which is pretty much impossible to parry for white, because if white goes queen d1, I can just go knight h6, and let's say, for instance, a beautiful mate would be this one. But instead of playing g takes f, I went for the other approach, which wins, but it's not as pretty as the move g takes f, in a sense, is the move g5. The idea is that if he takes with a knight, then I just go bishop e5. Now I loosened the position of this knight by deflecting the knight from e4 to g5. And after takes, he can no longer protect this knight. And yeah, of course, he's just now completely lost in such a position. So I could, for instance, win another piece like that. Okay, so after g5 check, he decided to take with the king. I went back to g2 another time, so right now the king cannot even come back to the 4th rank. And yeah, the king is trapped here. He gave 2 more checks, check on d4, and another check on f6. And I played king to h8. Yeah, and right now it's clear that my next move is going to be rook g8 check. And yeah, that's pretty much a checkmate. So he could, for instance, prolong it one more move with move knight d6, but then after rook g8, bishop g6, rook takes g6, I would win by checkmate, and therefore after the move king h8, my opponent resigned. Yeah, so this was the last round of that World Junior Championship. Very exciting game. It was definitely a lot of fun to play that. And now let me show you what this meant for the final standings. As you can see in the final standings, I came 22nd. So I was shared 13th till 25th. But after the tiebreak, I was 22nd, which was a great success for me at the time. And it's quite interesting to see that many of the players on that list now are like very, very strong grandmasters. So just for fun, I checked out and I saw that the first 12 players on this list, they are all grandmasters with a rating average above 2600 right now. So you can already see that those players who become very strong grandmasters, that they are also doing already pretty well during their youth. Not even mentioning that some players like Ruslan Ponomarev, Levon Aronian, Alexander Grishuk, Etienne Bacrot were not even playing in that tournament, although they would have been eligible. So thanks a lot for watching this episode, and see you soon.